The brass sundial in the center of the palace garden showed a perfect, sharp shadow pointing to the third hour. This was strange, because the sky over the kingdom of Lareth had been choked with thick, grey clouds all morning. It hadn't seen the sun once. Prince Cailan noticed this contradiction immediately, and it made a small, cold knot form in his stomach. It felt like a secret, or a lie told in plain sight. He wasn't alone in the garden. Walking beside him on the crushed white gravel path was Alara. She was a scholar from Viridia, the rival kingdom across the Silver Peak Mountains. Officially, she was a cultural envoy, sent to share historical texts and improve relations. She had arrived 18 months ago, on a crisp autumn day, and had simply never left. Their conversation was a familiar dance. Today, they were arguing, politely, of course, about the meaning of an old verse from a borderland ballad. The sound didn't just echo off the stone walls. It hit Cailan physically, right in the center of his chest. It was a vibration he felt in his bones, a punch of noise that stole the air from his lungs. All the peaceful sounds of the garden, the wind, the distant kitchen noises, were sliced away, replaced by that single, screaming horn. He jerked his eyes from Alara to the palace, then back to her. Her face had changed completely. All the gentle humor from their debate was gone. Her expression was set, grim, and resolved. It wasn't the shock of someone surprised by an attack. It was the look of someone watching a dreaded thing they knew was coming finally arrive. Without thinking, his body moved before his mind could catch up. He was running, the gravel skidding under his boots. The peaceful garden path became an obstacle course. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat that echoed in his ears. The sweet jasmine smell suddenly seemed cloying, suffocating. He burst from the garden archway into the main courtyard, and his world shattered into noise and movement. The scene was chaos, but a confusing one. He saw the flash of blue livery, his father's royal guards, clashing not with foreign soldiers, but with guards wearing forest green. Theron's personal household colors. Swords rang against shields. A horse, spooked and rearing, let out a scream that was horrifyingly human. Near the old stone well, Cailan saw young Finn, the stable boy who always saved him the sweetest apples, slumped on the ground. A shocking splash of crimson bloomed across the boy's simple tan tunic. This wasn't a border attack. This was something inside the palace. A coup. A fight for the throne itself. A guard in blue stumbled past him, his arm hanging at a sickening angle. The man's sword slid from his grasp and clattered on the cobblestones, spinning to a stop at Cailan's feet. Cailan stared at the weapon. The polished steel reflected the chaotic sky. He had a choice, right there, in that single second. He could pick up the sword and join the fight for his birthright. He could try to find Theron. He could fight for the crown. But his mind wasn't on the throne. It was on Alara's whisper in the garden. They know about the letters. If Theron had his letters, he had more than just weapons. He had proof of Cailan's treasonous correspondence with a Viridian. He could paint him as a traitor, a spy. Those private pages, filled with his own handwriting and his most vulnerable hopes, would become a death sentence. The choice was instant, and he knew it was irreversible. He bent down, his fingers closing around the cool, leather-bound hilt of the fallen sword. Its weight was foreign and terrible in his hand. But he didn't turn toward the heart of the fighting in the courtyard. Instead, he turned and ran back along the wall, heading for the oldest part of the palace, the archives wing, where his private chambers were. He was choosing the secret over the crown. He was choosing to protect the fragile, paper-thin truth of his connection with Alara over the solid, stone reality of the throne. He slammed his shoulder against his own heavy oak door, bursting into the room that had been his since he was a boy. The familiar scent of beeswax polish and old books greeted him. Everything was in its place. His large, carved bed. His desk scattered with maps. The tapestry of the hunting scene on the far wall. He ran to the tapestry and yanked it aside. Behind it, in the stone wall, was a slight discoloration, a stone slightly smoother than the others. He pressed the edges, his fingers trembling. The stone gave way. It had been pried loose already. He reached into the dark cavity. His hand touched only cold, rough rock. It was empty. The bundle of letters, tied with a simple green ribbon, was gone. A hollow feeling, colder than the stone, opened up inside him. He let the tapestry fall back and turned slowly. That's when he saw it. Lying in the exact center of his blue woolen bed cover was a single, crisp sheet of parchment. He walked to it, his legs feeling like wood. The document was written in a formal, elegant script. It was a treaty of alliance between the kingdom of Lareth and the kingdom of Viridia. It granted Viridia sole rights to the rich iron mines in the Silver Peak Mountains, lands his father had fought 2 wars to hold. In exchange for this, it promised military support to Crown Prince Theron to secure his rule. And then he saw the final clause. In return for these concessions, a marriage would seal the alliance. The hand of the Viridian scholar, Alara of House Vane, was offered to Crown Prince Theron. At the bottom of the page were 2 signatures. One was Theron's, a sharp, arrogant slash of ink. The other, neat and precise, was Alara's. The air left the room. The sounds of distant fighting faded to a dull roar in his ears. The scholarly debates, the shared laughter in the garden, the careful, hopeful words in the stolen letters. Had it all just been a negotiation? Was she not a scholar, but a diplomat closing a deal? Was he not a confidant, but a pawn? He stood there, the foreign sword heavy in his hand, in the silent ruin of his last normal moment. The horn had stopped blowing outside. A new, deeper silence was spreading. He looked at the empty space in the wall, then at the damning paper on his bed. A single, quiet sentence formed in his mind, a realization that tasted like ash. All this time, he thought they were building something. But maybe, for her, it was just a trade route. The silence after the horn was the worst part. It was a thick, heavy thing that pressed down on the courtyard. Prince Cailan stood just inside the archway, the cold weight of the stolen sword in his hand feeling all wrong. The fight hadn't lasted long, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. But the scene it left behind was etched into his mind like a brand. Men in blue and green lay still on the cobblestones. The air smelled sharp, like iron, and kicked up dust. A horse with a gash on its flank stood trembling by the stables, its breathing a loud, ragged sound. Near the old stone well, young Finn, the stable boy, hadn't moved. The red on his tunic was darker now, a wet stain. Cailan's throat closed up. Finn was only 14. He'd taught the boy how to check a horse's hoof for stones just last week. This wasn't an invasion. This was a sickness from inside. His own brother, Theron, had made his move for the throne. And Cailan, holding this sword, had to make a choice. Go find Theron and fight for a crown he never really wanted, or follow the cold fear in his gut. Asterisk they know about the letters. Asterisk. The letters. His own words, written late at night, full of ideas for peace and shared rule with Viridia. In Theron's hands, they wouldn't look like hope. They'd look like treason. They'd be the excuse to lock him away forever, or worse. He had to get to them first. His feet were moving before he finished the thought. He didn't run toward the main hall where the fighting had been thickest. He ducked low and sprinted along the inner wall, keeping to the shadows where the afternoon sun couldn't reach. The sword felt clumsy. He was a decent fighter in the practice yard, but this was different. This was real. He slipped through a narrow servant's door, the wood groaning as he pushed it shut behind him. The sudden quiet in the hallway was a shock. It was the back way to the archives wing, a corridor of plain stone used for bringing firewood and linens. The only sound was his own breathing, too loud in his own ears, and the distant, muffled shouts from outside. Halfway down the hall, he almost tripped. A guard in a blue tunic was slumped against the wall, his face pale. It was Orvan, a man who'd served his father for 20 years. His right arm was bent at a sickening angle. The man's eyes fluttered open as Cailan approached. "My prince." Orvan's voice was a dry rasp. He tried to shift and winced, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Don't move," Cailan said, kneeling. He looked at the twisted arm, feeling useless. "I'll get help." Orvan shook his head, a tiny movement. "No time." They came for your rooms first. Green cloaks. Before the horn even blew. He swallowed with difficulty. They knew where to go. The cold fear in Kalen's stomach turned to ice. They had been ahead of him the whole time. He looked at the sword in his hand, a useless piece of metal. He set it down gently on the stones beside Orvan. Take this. Just in case. Orvan's good hand reached out and gripped Kalen's wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. Your brother. He has the whole North Guard in his pocket. Don't fight his war. Fight your own. Kalen didn't know what that meant, but he nodded. He stood, leaving the sword, and ran. His soft leather boots made no sound on the stone. His heart was a frantic bird trying to escape his chest. He took the spiral stairs to the family quarters 2 at a time, the familiar worn steps feeling foreign under his feet. He reached his door. The solid oak was slightly ajar. He pushed it open slowly. His room was untouched. His bed was neatly made. The morning's half-finished cup of mint tea still sat on his desk, the liquid now cold. A beam of grey light from the high window fell across his favourite tapestry, the one of a hunter and a great stag. It all looked so normal. For a dizzy second, he thought maybe Orvan was wrong. He went straight to the tapestry and pulled it aside. The stone behind it was loose. He could see fresh, pale scratches in the mortar around it. His fingers worked at the edges, and the stone came free easily. He reached into the dark hole. His fingertips brushed only rough, cold rock. He swept his hand around the small cavity, a desperate hope rising and then crumbling just as fast. Empty. The bundle of papers, tied with the green ribbon Alara had once worn in her hair, was gone. He let the stone drop from his other hand. It hit the floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo in the silent room. He stood there, the tapestry still bunched in his fist, staring at the empty hole in the wall. It felt like looking at his own heart. That's when he turned and saw it. A single piece of parchment, creamy and official, lay in the exact center of his blue wool bed cover. It hadn't been there before. Someone had placed it there while he was in the garden, or during the fight. He walked over, his legs feeling numb. The document was written in a beautiful, formal script. He recognized it as the hand of Theron's personal scribe. The words blurred at first, then sharpened into terrible clarity. Asterisk Treaty of Solemn Alliance between the Kingdom of Lareth and the Kingdom of Viridia. Asterisk. It granted Viridia full control of the Silver Peak iron mines. His father had spent a fortune and lost 100 good men to secure those mines. In return, Viridia pledged troops to support the rule of Crown Prince Theron, to ensure a stable and peaceful transition of power. Then he saw the final clause. His breath hitched. Asterisk, shall be sealed by the sacred union of Crown Prince Theron of Lareth and Lady Alara of House Vane, Scholar Envoy of Viridia. Asterisk. At the bottom of the page were 2 signatures. The first was Theron's, a sharp, slashing line, confident and arrogant. The second was neat, precise, and unmistakable. Asterisk Alara. Asterisk. The world tilted. Kalen had to put a hand on the bedpost to steady himself. The sounds of the courtyard, the smell of dust, the image of Finn by the well, all of it faded away, replaced by a roaring in his ears. He saw Alara's face in the garden, her strained smile. He heard her whisper about the letters. Had she been warning him, or covering her own tracks? All their talks, all those hours debating history and philosophy under the willow tree, was that just research for her? Was she figuring out how weak Lareth was, how easily his family could be split? He thought of her laughter, the intelligent light in her eyes, the way she always listened like his words truly mattered. It had felt real. It had felt like the beginning of something true, something that could bridge the gap between their 2 kingdoms. But this parchment told a different story, a colder one. It said she was a piece in a political game. It said his trust was just a tool she used. The hopeful ideas in his letters, the dreams of a shared future, they weren't a secret to build on. They were just leverage. A trade route. That's what the thought felt like, a sharp, ugly thing cutting him from the inside. A trade route. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the parchment crumpling slightly in his hand. The room was utterly silent. The fight outside was over. Theron had won. And he, Kalen, was alone in his room with the proof that the one person he thought he could trust had been working against him the whole time. He sat there for a long while, watching the light from the window slowly change from grey to a deeper, colder blue as the afternoon slid toward evening. He didn't cry. He just felt hollowed out, like all the feeling had been scraped away, leaving only the quiet, heavy weight of betrayal. But deep down, under the numbness, a tiny, stubborn question began to form. It was just a whisper at first. Why would she warn him about the letters if she had just signed a treaty with Theron? Why risk it? It was a small crack in the story the parchment told. A crack he couldn't ignore. The game wasn't over. He had just been playing the wrong one. The knock on the door wasn't loud. It was a polite, three-tap sound that somehow felt worse than a battering ram. Kalen was still sitting on the edge of his bed, the treaty crumpled in his hand. He didn't say anything. The door opened anyway. 2 guards in forest green cloaks stood there. They weren't rough. They didn't yell. Their faces were blank, like smooth stones. "Prince Kalen," the taller one said. "Crown Prince Theron requests your presence in the North Tower. For your safety." The word safety hung in the air, tasting like a lie. Kalen looked from their faces to the empty space in the wall behind the tapestry, then back to the treaty in his hand. He knew what this was. He stood up slowly, smoothing the parchment out. He folded it once, carefully, and placed it back on the bed. It felt like leaving a piece of himself behind. The walk to the North Tower was the longest of his life. They didn't touch him. They just walked beside and behind him, their boots echoing in the now silent hallways. The palace was a ghost of itself. Servants were gone. The usual hum of life had been swallowed up by a watchful, nervous quiet. They passed a window overlooking the courtyard. Men in green were already cleaning up, hauling away the signs of the brief, brutal fight. A bucket of water sloshed pink over the cobblestones where Finn had lain. Kalen looked away, his stomach tight. The North Tower was the oldest part of the palace. It was where his grandfather had kept his astronomy tools. The circular room at the top had one large, arched window looking west, over the rolling hills of Lareth toward the distant, hazy line of the Silver Peak Mountains. The door was thick oak, banded with iron. It shut behind him with a soft, final click. There was no lock on the inside. He was alone. The room wasn't a dungeon. It was comfortably furnished. A bed with a woolen blanket. A writing desk. A small fireplace, cold and dark. A shelf with a few old books. But the window had narrow iron bars, and the only thing on the desk was a single sheet of blank parchment, a pot of ink, and a quill pen. An invitation to write something. A confession, perhaps. The first day passed in a blur of grey light and silence. A maid he didn't recognize brought food, a simple stew and bread, sliding the tray through a slot at the bottom of the door. She never looked at him. He couldn't eat. He spent hours at the window, watching the clouds drift and change shape over his kingdom. His asterisk kingdom. That thought felt like a joke now. On the second day, the rain started. A soft, relentless drizzle that blurred the world outside into shades of grey and green. It tapped against the window glass, a constant, whispering sound. It rained for a week. Kalen watched the water run in tiny rivers down the leaded panes. He watched a spider in the upper corner of the window patiently rebuild its web every morning after the night winds destroyed it. He felt a strange kinship with that spider, doing something useless over and over, because it was all it knew how to do. He thought about Alara. Her face floated in his memory, but it was changing. The warm, intelligent smile he remembered now seemed calculated. The light in her eyes looked like strategy, not kindness. He replayed every conversation, every walk in the garden, looking for the clues he'd missed. Had she ever really been his friend? Or was she just a very good actor, sent to soften him up, to learn his weaknesses? The hollow feeling in his chest grew, filled with the cold rain that seemed to seep through the stone walls. On the 8th day, the rain stopped. The clouds broke apart, letting through thin, watery sunlight. The door opened, and Theron walked in. Kaelin's half-brother looked like a king already. He wore a dark green tunic embroidered with silver threads. His dark hair was perfectly trimmed. He carried no weapon. He didn't need to. He stood by the cold fireplace, looking at Kaelin by the window with an expression of mild disappointment, like a teacher looking at a bright student who had failed a simple test. "You look tired, brother," Theron said, his voice calm. Kaelin said nothing. He just watched him. "The situation is stable," Theron continued, as if giving a report. "The Viridian ambassador is pleased. The treaty signing will be in 3 days' time. A public ceremony in the Great Hall. A unification of 2 kingdoms. A new era of peace." He paused, letting the words hang in the quiet room. "It would mean a great deal if you were there. Standing beside me. Showing your support." Kaelin finally found his voice. It sounded rough from lack of use. "My support." Of course. The younger prince, endorsing the transition. It would soothe any lingering doubts among the people. It would prevent any misguided loyalties from flaring up into something unfortunate. Theron's eyes were sharp, picking him apart. "War is ugly, Kaelin. You saw a glimpse of it in the courtyard. I don't want that for our people. I want peace. This treaty guarantees it." Kaelin looked out the window. The hills were so green after all the rain. He thought of the men who wore his father's blue, now dead or imprisoned. He thought of Finn. He thought of Orvin with his broken arm in the hallway. "And if I don't stand beside you?" Theron sighed, a soft, regretful sound. "Then you would be a traitor. The evidence is, unfortunately, quite clear. Your secret letters with the Viridian envoy, plotting against the crown. It's a sad story. One that would force my hand. I would have to exile you. Strip you of your title." He leaned forward slightly. "And those few guards and lords who still whisper your name? They would call it an injustice. They would fight for you. And they would lose, Kaelin. Every single one of them. The blood would be on your hands, not mine. You would start a war you cannot win, just for your pride." The choice was laid out before him, cold and simple. He could bend. He could stand at that ceremony, watch Alara marry his brother, and swallow the bitter truth. In return, the fighting would stop. No one else would get hurt. His kingdom would have peace, even if it was Theron's peace. Or he could refuse. He could become a symbol of resistance. And in doing so, he would sign a death warrant for every person who still believed in him. They would fight, and they would die, for a prince who was too stubborn to see when the game was over. Theron walked to the desk and tapped the blank parchment. "You don't have to decide now. Write your speech of support when you're ready. The ink is fresh." He left then, the door closing with that same soft, final click. Kaelin walked to the window. The spider had finished its web. It was a perfect, intricate circle, gleaming with tiny droplets of rain. He stared at his own reflection in the glass, blurred and superimposed over the green hills. Who did he see? He didn't see a brave rebel prince. He didn't see a wronged hero. He saw a young man who had been naive. He'd been so busy dreaming of a grand peace, of a love that could bridge a feud, that he hadn't seen the simple, ugly moves happening right in front of him. He'd trusted words on a page and a kind smile. He'd mistaken a political play for a personal connection. The reflection showed him a fool. A well-meaning fool, perhaps, but a fool nonetheless. His greatest flaw wasn't a lack of courage. It was a surplus of hope. The impossible choice sat on his shoulders, heavier than any crown. Peace through silence and self-betrayal, or a bloody, hopeless war sparked by his own conscience. Evening came. The maid brought his dinner tray, a bowl of soup, a hunk of cheese. She slid it through the slot and hurried away. But this time, something else came through. A tiny, folded scrap of parchment, no bigger than a coin, fluttered to the floor. His heart gave a single, hard thump. He snatched it up. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, but he knew it instantly. It was Alara's. There was no greeting. No name. Just one line, smudged as if written in great haste. Asterisk, the sundial was always wrong. Asterisk. He stared at those 5 words. The sundial in the garden. The one that showed a shadow without sun. The one she had looked at just before the horn blew. Asterisk, it was always wrong. Asterisk. And like a crack of lightning splitting the dark sky of his mind, Kaelin realized the truth. The asterisk treaty signature asterisk was a lie. It wasn't her promise. It was a forgery. A prop in Theron's play. The real treaty, the real agreement, was something else. The sundial was wrong. The evidence before his eyes was wrong. She wasn't marrying Theron. She was trapped, just like he was. She had tried to warn him in the garden, and she was warning him now, at great risk. The hollow feeling in his chest didn't fill with joy. It filled with fire. He had been looking at the game all wrong. He'd thought he was a player who had lost. But he wasn't a player at all. He had been one of the pieces on the board. And so was she. He crumpled the tiny scrap of paper in his fist and walked to the barred window. The first stars were coming out, pinpricks of light in the vast, darkening blue. He wasn't a fool for hoping. He was a fool for stopping. The game wasn't over. He just had to learn the real rules. And he had to find out what was in the real letters, the ones Theron had actually stolen. Because those held the key. He could feel it. For the first time in 8 days, a real smile, hard and determined, touched his lips. He had a choice to make, but it wasn't the one Theron had given him. It was something else entirely. And he was finally ready to make it. The folded scrap of parchment felt like a live coal in Kaelin's hand. Asterisk, the sundial was always wrong. Asterisk, he read the words again, feeling the world shift under his feet. The treaty with Alara's signature was a fake. A lie. The anger that rose in him wasn't hot and wild. It was cold, clear, and focused. He'd been sitting in this tower feeling sorry for himself, playing the part of the betrayed prince. But Alara was out there, risking everything to send him this message. It was time to stop being a piece on Theron's board and start moving on his own. His first move was surrender. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. The next morning, when the silent maid brought his breakfast, he handed her the blank parchment from the desk. On it, he had written, in his most formal script, Asterisk, I will stand with my brother for the peace of Lareth. Asterisk, he didn't look her in the eye. He made his own expression look hollow, defeated. The performance hurt, but he poured every bit of his feeling of foolishness from the last week into it. Word came back quickly. Theron himself appeared at the door that afternoon, a satisfied smile on his face. A wise choice, brother. I knew you'd see reason. Kaelin kept his gaze on the floor, the picture of submission. I don't want more bloodshed, he mumbled, repeating Theron's own words back to him. I just want peace. It worked. The guards on his door relaxed. He was allowed to walk the tower's narrow, circular hallway for exercise, though always under watch. He used these walks to look, really look. He saw the young guard whose hand shook slightly as he held his spear, not from fear, but from a simmering anger. Kaelin remembered him, Arlen, whose older brother had served in his father's personal guard. That brother was now imprisoned in the cells below. Days passed, each one bringing the grand treaty signing ceremony closer. The palace buzzed with frantic preparation, the smell of polishing wax, the sound of hammering as a new dais was built in the great hall. Kaelin played his part perfectly. He rehearsed his short speech of support for Theron's captain, his voice flat and emotionless. He let them bring him new clothes for the ceremony, a tunic of Lareth blue, but trimmed with Theron's green. He accepted it all. But underneath, he was working. He was using the very thing Theron thought he had crushed, his connection to people. He wasn't building an army. He was building a web, just like the spider in his window. During his walk one day, he paused near Arlen, the young guard. He didn't look at him. He just stared out a narrow arrow-slit window and said, very quietly, I heard about your brother, Cade. He was a good man. He always made sure my horse had an extra apple. He walked on before Arlen could react. The next day, a different slice of cheese was on his meal tray. Sharper, better. A small, silent message. He noticed the maid, Liana, who cleaned the hearth. She had red, puffy eyes. He'd heard the cook's whispering. Her sweetheart was Finn, the stable boy, who was still clinging to life in the healer's quarters. One afternoon, as she dusted, Kaelin said, "Finn loves the yellow wildflowers that grow by the east gate. He once told me they remind him of his mother's hair." Liana's hand stilled for a second, and she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He even reached out to the old archivist, Master Tellen, a man who cared more for books than for kings. Kaelin sent a note, hidden in a returned soup bowl, with a simple question about a historical Viridian farming calendar, a topic he and Alara had once discussed. The reply came back with his lunch, a boring text about crop rotations. But scribbled in the margin, in Tellen's shaky hand, were 2 words, *northlibrary.*. This was his new weapon. Not a sword, but attention. Not commands, but memories. He saw people, really saw them, and reminded them that he did. While Theron saw soldiers and servants, Kaelin saw Arlen, Liana, and Tellen. His network was made of grief, loyalty, and love, not gold or threats. The night before the signing arrived. The palace was quiet, holding its breath for the grand spectacle tomorrow. Kaelin lay on his bed, fully dressed, watching the moon trace a path across the floor. He had a plan, fragile and dangerous, built entirely on the hope that people, when reminded of their humanity, would choose to act on it. Just after midnight, a sound broke the silence. Not a horn, but a deep, ringing clang from the direction of the old barracks, followed by shouts and the smell of smoke on the breeze. A fire. His heart leapt into his throat. This was the signal. This was Arlen, and whoever he had gathered. His door flew open. The single guard posted there, not Arlen, was distracted, looking down the hall toward the noise and the orange glow flickering on the stone walls. "Stay here," the guard barked, and ran toward the commotion. Kaelin didn't stay. He slipped out and moved in the opposite direction, a shadow in the familiar hallways. He headed not for the main halls, but for the oldest part of the palace, the North Library, a cold, dusty room few visited anymore. His soft boots made no sound. His pulse was a steady drum in his ears, not from panic, but from purpose. He pushed open the heavy oak door. The room was dark, lit only by a single shaft of moonlight from a high window. It fell on a large, carved desk piled with maps. And standing by the desk, waiting, was Theron. "I wondered if you'd come here," Theron said. He sounded almost bored. He wasn't dressed for bed. He wore a rich robe, as if he'd been up all night planning. On the desk between them, scattered like fallen leaves, were the letters. His asterisk letters. The ones from the hole in the wall, still tied with the faded green ribbon. Next to them lay a few others in Alara's neat script. "The fire is a nice touch," Theron continued, picking up one of Kaelin's letters. "A bit obvious, but it shows spirit. I assume it was for the girl, Liana? Or the young guard with the traitor brother?" He shook his head. "Sentiment. Kaelin. It's always been your weakness." Kaelin stood his ground, his eyes fixed on the letters. "And deception is yours." Theron smiled. "It's not deception. It's politics. You wrote beautiful dreams in these." He tapped the paper. "But dreams don't forge treaties. Steel and silver do. The Viridians understand that. Alara understands that." "Where is she?" Kaelin asked, his voice tight. "Safe. Preparing for her wedding tomorrow. She's a practical woman. She saw which way the wind was blowing." Theron's eyes glinted in the moonlight. "She was your tutor, in a way. She taught you just enough about Viridia to make you useful, to make your infatuation convincing. It gave our alliance a lovely, personal touch." The words were meant to cut, and they did. They found the old, bruised part of Kaelin that still wondered if it was all a lie. But he clung to the scrap of parchment in his memory. The sundial was always wrong. He looked at Theron's confident face and saw not a truth-teller, but a man who believed his own story too completely. Kaelin's eyes scanned the room. There, on the mantel above the cold fireplace, was a heavy brass object. It was a duplicate of the garden sundial, a decorative piece his grandfather had kept, a solid weight of metal. For the scholar, Theron said, following his gaze with a smirk, mistaking his look for one of despair, you were remarkably emotional in print. It was the final, arrogant flourish. Theron thought he had already won. He thought Kaelin was here to beg for the letters or for Alara. He didn't understand that Kaelin was here for something else entirely, to prove that the story could change. At that moment, the door to the library creaked open again. Alara stood there, framed in the doorway. She wore a simple grey dress, not wedding finery. Her hair was down, a silver-streaked wave over her shoulders. Her face was pale but calm. Behind her stood two large men in unfamiliar grey cloaks, Viridian guards. Theron's smile widened. Ah, see. Even now, she comes to me. But Alara's eyes weren't on Theron. They were on Kaelin. They held a warning, an apology, and a fierce, blazing hope all at once. She took a step into the room. Theron, believing the guards were there for him, gestured toward Kaelin. Take him back to his tower. We have a ceremony in the morning. The guards didn't move. A beat of silence filled the dusty library, thick and heavy. In that silence, Kaelin made his decision. He wasn't a swordsman. He wasn't a schemer like Theron. He was a man who believed in connections, in things that were real. And the most real thing in the room at that moment was the heavy, wrong sundial on the mantel. He moved. It wasn't a graceful fighter's lunge. It was a desperate, committed reach. His fingers closed around the cold, sharp-edged brass of the sundial. He pulled it from the mantel, its weight staggering him for a half-step. He saw Theron's smirk vanish, replaced by shock. He saw Alara's eyes go wide. He saw the Viridian guards start forward. He didn't swing it at Theron. Not yet. He held it, a heavy, useless truth in his hands, a symbol of time that couldn't be trusted. He stood between his brother and the woman he loved, between the lie and the truth, with only this clumsy piece of metal and the wild, beating hope in his chest. The fight was no longer in the courtyard. It was here, in this quiet room of books and secrets, and for the first time, he was truly ready for it. The old wooden door groaned, a long, tired sound pushed by the wind coming off the sea. It was the kind of sound that spoke of salt in the air and slow, patient weathering. Kaelin pushed it shut with his shoulder, his hands full with a net of fresh fish. The little stone house on the cliff was simple, with a chipped blue door and a roof of sun-bleached thatch. It had been their home for 6 months now. Inside, the main room was warm from the hearth fire. The air smelled of baking bread and the sharp, clean scent of the sea. On a rough wooden table by the window sat a curious object. It was the brass sundial from the palace garden. One side was deeply dented, as if from a great impact. The slender metal pointer, the gnomon, was bent to the side, forever pointing at nothing. It didn't tell time anymore. It just sat there, gathering the soft, salty haze that drifted through the open window, a silent piece of the past. Kaelin set the fish in a stone sink. He wiped his hands on his trousers, simple, coarse-spun things, not royal velvet. His right hand bore a thin, pale scar across the knuckles, a souvenir from the night in the library. He walked to the table, his fingers brushing the cool, tarnished brass of the sundial as he reached for a map. The map was well worn, its corners soft from handling. It showed the 2 kingdoms, Lareth and Viridia, but the borders were different now. The Silver Peak Mountains were marked with a shared symbol, and a dotted line showed a new trade road running right through them. It wasn't a map of one kingdom or the other. It was a map of an agreement. The war, in the end, hadn't been a great, sweeping battle. It had been a swift, sharp change, like a surgeon's cut. The fire in the barracks had been a diversion, yes, but the real shift happened in that dusty library. When Kaelin had grabbed the sundial, he hadn't swung it. He had held it, a heavy, undeniable truth between himself and Theron. And Alara had spoken. Her voice, clear and firm in the tense quiet, had been directed at the Viridian guards. Stand down. They had listened to her, not to Theron. Because they weren't Theron's men. They were her father's. The real treaty, the one she had been sent to negotiate, wasn't about marriage or mines. It was about balance. Her father, the king of Viridia, had no interest in a strong, united Lareth under a man like Theron. He wanted a stable neighbor. And he believed that stability came from the younger prince who wrote letters about shared waterways and joint libraries. Theron, faced not with a rebellious brother but with the collapse of his own made-up story, had crumpled. His power was a sheet of ice over a lake, and Alara's words had been the rock that cracked it. The coup ended that night. Theron was not king. He lived, comfortably, in a southern estate. His influence diminished but his life spared. It was the compromise Kaelin had insisted on. No more blood. Not even Theron's. A knock came at the door, a familiar pattern, two quick, one slow. Kaelin opened it to a man with a cheerful face and, noticeably, very bright yellow shoes. Jonas, Kaelin smiled, stepping aside. Just delivering the post, my lord, Jonas said with a wink, handing over a bundle of letters. He had once been a palace guard in a blue tunic. Now, he ran messages and, it was rumored, the best bakery in the old capital. He came by every few months with news and fresh yeast. How's the little one? Kaelin asked. Walking. And into everything, Jonas laughed, his eyes crinkling. The kingdom is quiet. Boring. Even. Just how we like it. He nodded toward the map on the table. Good to see it still gets use. With a friendly wave, he was gone, his yellow shoes a spot of sunshine heading down the cliff path. Kaelin sorted through the letters. One was from Master Tellen, the archivist, updating him on the new history he was writing. One that included the full, complicated story. Another was from Arlen, who was now a captain of the restored Royal Guard, training new recruits with a focus on knowing the people you protect. Kaelin's heart felt full. They had all found their places. Outside, the small, stubborn lemon tree they had planted in a sheltered spot by the house was finally taking hold. Its leaves were a vibrant green against the grey rock, and it held a handful of tiny, perfect buds. It had survived the winter winds. It was a little piece of tomorrow, growing right outside their window. The sound of footsteps, light and sure, came from the back room. Alara entered, her hair a loose cloud of dark and silver around her shoulders. She carried a small pot of fresh, dark ink, which she set on the table beside the bent sundial. An ink stain, fresh and blue, smudged her left index finger. She didn't look at the sundial or the map. She looked out the window at the vast, shimmering sea, a quiet contentment on her face. She moved to stand beside Kaelin, her shoulder lightly brushing his arm as she leaned to see the map. He didn't move away. He leaned into the touch, a simple, profound comfort. No grand speeches. No declarations. Just a shared space, a shared silence, and a shared view of the future they were drawing together, one day at a time. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the distant cry of the gulls, and the constant, gentle sigh of the wind. On the table, the broken sundial caught the afternoon light but cast no shadow. It didn't need to. Time wasn't something to be caught and measured in brass anymore. It was something they were building, together, in a house by the sea. Alara turned from the window, her eyes meeting his. She smiled, a real, easy smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She nodded at the loaf of bread cooling on the hearthstone. The bread's getting cold, she said. And it was. And it was perfect.